A pleasant good day. Welcome to the Apnu AFC live update as we continue to bring you the information of national importance. To all of you here in Ghana, the Caribbean, and around the world, welcome to our program. I have the privilege of being joined by my colleague, Mr. Sherrod Duncan, today. Good afternoon, Sherrod.
A very good afternoon, Chris, and members of the public. Thank you for joining us for this lunch hour update. Yep.
All right, so just, well, it's late breaking, but over the night, very early in the morning, an incident that the police is still currently investigating, and this is as it relates to veteran journalist Mr. Travis Chase, whose vehicle early in the wee hours of the morning, someone set alight. His vehicle, which was parked at the Ministry of the Presidency's compound there at Vassingen and Durban Street. The police are still investigating the incident. However, CCTV cameras capture the moment when the vehicle was set alight.
Seen the light in the corner? Look, the person's lighting whatever, look. Onto the vehicle now. There you go. Boom. It's lighting. Boom. Look at that. Full explosion. Seen the light in the corner? Look, the person's lighting whatever, look. Onto the vehicle now. There you go. Boom. It's lighting. Boom. Look at that. Full explosion.
Yep. And welcome back. What makes this even a little more strange is that, for all accounts, this is the parking area in the Ministry of the Presidency, and other vehicles. I think there was a motorcycle close by and another vehicle which were also badly burned, but it seemed that the perpetrator was taking aim specifically at Mr. Chase's vehicle there, that was parked overnight at the Ministry of the Presidency, and that vehicle has been completely destroyed by fire. As you see, there was somebody there setting the vehicle alight, and the vehicle has been completely destroyed. And you know, this political season has not been void of or absence with any with violence by any means. You know what transpired by now in places like Bad Settlement, attack on the police. You know what transpired with that school bus at Bushlat, with those young school children going home after a day's work at school. You know, policeman was attacked and the quarantine, and some others at Cotton Tree. One guy was shot dead who was attacking police. We are yet to know whether this is a similar politically related incident, but this political season which we're still in has not been void of such activity. And of course, Travis Chase has been one who has been on the forefront of covering all of the breaking news, whether politically or otherwise. And so we are eagerly waiting to see what the investigations in this burning of his vehicle will uncover.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, again, too, Travis Chase is one of those journalists who probes in depth as it relates to investigating. He was the journalist that had that interview with Sean Hines some years ago, in which Sean Hines sought to set the record straight as it relates to his involvement with the then Phantom Death Squad that was under the People's Progressive Party civic government, and many other key interview that Travis Chase is one of those reporters, was able to get to the root of many of those incidents and so forth, and bring that information to the public's domain. And of course, in this political season, Travis Chase, like many other journalists, like many other media operatives, have been going about doing their own investigations and so forth, and putting the facts out as it speaks. It is not the first time. I know of about 2 incidents in the past in which the life of Travis Chase was actually threatened, to the extent in which the Ghana Police Force had to provide had to make a special security arrangement to protect his person. But of course, that was some years ago. Now in this particular political season, and of course reports are coming out, it could offend persons. Yourself and I, Sharon, we too are not spared just a few weeks ago, just after the national recount exercise at the Architron Conference Center, we too received credible information in which both of us have been put on a security alert list and advised to take all necessary security precaution because of this very program that we're doing here. So it is no different for whether it's Travis Chase or any of the other journalists across the spectrum, regardless of which media house they represent. Journalists across the media spectrum in Guyana, from time to time, their lives are being threatened, or even person trying to sway them not to do their jobs. I know of incidents outside of the court where verbal abuse is hurled at some of them because of the particular house that they represent and so forth. But of course, all of those incidents has to be condemned by all and sundry, because the journalists across the spectrum here in Guyana, like across the world, have every right to cover their story, to be protected, and ensure that they know that no one will tamper with them trying to execute their work in the manner in which they have been doing it. So again, we continue to condemn attacks on all media operative across the spectrum here in Guyana. And of course, just last night, or the wee hours in the morning, we saw the incident in which veteran journalist Travis Chase's vehicle was set alight. Police are still investigating the incident. His vehicle is usually parked in the Ministry of the Presidency's compound, which is located on the corners of Vasinjan and Durban Streets. And there you see there the CCTV camera capturing the moment when the person or persons set his vehicle alight. That vehicle has been completely destroyed. I'm being told that it is a CRV, and the vehicle is about three months old. Yes, so a 3 months old vehicle there, completely gutted, set alight in the wee hours in the morning, and the vehicle belonging to veteran journalist Mr. Travis Chase from HGPT.
And Chris, again, what makes it a little even more brazen is the fact that this was the Ministry of the Presidency's compound.
That's correct.
Which is supposed to be secure, and we see this assault on this vehicle. But again, this political season hasn't been short or anything like that. We've seen journalists who were verbally assaulted by candidates in this election. Clearly not on our side. We conduct ourselves much better than that. We saw a doctor, for instance, at the Architron Conference Center during the tabulation phase 1, who tried to test the temperature of one candidate who, according to the report coming out of the DPP's office, had her hands slapped away by the candidate because he refused to have his temperature checked. So, we have seen, all of it. We've seen the activities at places like Munripo. We've seen it at Bushlot. We've seen what transpired at Bat Settlement. And so, we've consistently said on this program that we want our supporters to remain calm, all Guyanese, to respect the rule of law, and let us, conduct ourselves properly.
And again, too, across the spectrum, all journalists, all media operative has every right to conduct their duties unhindered by any supporter or supporters of any political party. And of course, we continue to condemn any attacks, whether verbal, physical, or otherwise, on any media operative operating throughout the length and breadth of this country, irrespective of the media house that they represent. They must be allowed to conduct their jobs in an environment that they don't have to fear
without fear.
Attacks on their person or their equipment. Right. So the police are still investigating that incident.
And last evening, Chris, we sat down and spoke with our senior counsel, Mr. Nigel Hughes, on the Court of Appeal, the CCJ case rather, that comes up for discussion on Wednesday. This is the Mr. Irfan Ali, Barajagli and others versus Eslin David. And we know that case has been pushed over to the CCJ from the Court of Appeal. It has been brought by the PPP, before the CCJ. We know the implications of that case. And we spoke with Mr. Nigel Hughes, attorney at law, who really and truly put the case into context last evening for us. And we want to bring you a part of that discussion, and we're going to come back with some comments on the other side of it.
Tonight we have the privilege of being joined by attorney at law, Mr. Nigel Hughes, who will be providing his perspective on all of these that we're covering. A pleasant good evening to you, Mr. Hughes.
Good evening, Chris. How are you?
Not bad, sir. Not bad at all. I have my colleague Sherrod Duncan with us tonight, and of course we want to first thank you very much for sharing this time with us this evening.
Thank you, Chris. Good night, Sherrod. It's always a pleasure to share whatever limited knowledge I have.
This a big case coming up before the CCJ on Wednesday. I know you have appeared before the CCJ in the past. What is your sense in terms of the judges? A sense of what they are like, what the public can expect, and any thoughts on the case in general, and then we can ask some specific questions.
Well, as you know, the CCJ is the highest court, is the apex court for Guyana. I don't think it's polite to comment on the quality of the judgments that come out of the court, unless, of course, you're doing that in an academic setting, and, of course, in those circumstances, you would have to set out the basis upon which you come to a conclusion. But I think, by and large, the CCJ has discharged its responsibilities admirably since it came into effect as Guyana's highest court. I think most people who have appeared before the CCJ will find it, certainly from Guyana's point of view, it's a good court to appear before. I don't know if that answers your question.
Thank you. And a general sense of your impression of the case that's coming before the court on Wednesday, and then we'll get into some specific questions.
I think perhaps for the benefit of your listeners, I should perhaps attempt to set the legal context, both historical and contemporary, in which this case is being heard. So in 1980, the new constitution was promulgated and brought into effect. In 2003, as a result of difficulties that we had nationwide from 1997 and having gone through the entire constitutional reform process, there were a series of amendments that were made to the Constitution. However, after those amendments, Article 144(7) said this, and this is after the 2003 amendment. So this is what it said: the Court of Appeal shall have exclusive jurisdiction to hear and determine any question as to the validity of an election of a president, insofar as that question depends on the qualification of any person for election or the interpretation of the Constitution, and any decision of the court under this paragraph shall be final. So that's what the Constitution said up to 2003, after we had the amendment. As everybody knows, the Constitution is the highest and it is the supreme law of the land. In 2004, the following year, Guyana passed the Caribbean Court of Justice Act, and that act actually added the Caribbean Court of Justice and created it as the highest appellate court in the country. And at the time they passed that act, of course, the Constitution existed, and Article 177(4), which I just read, was part of the Constitution. And here is what the Act said, the Caribbean Court of Justice Act said in Section 4. It says, nothing in this Act shall confer jurisdiction on the court, meaning the court of the CCJ, to hear matters in relation to any decision of the Court of Appeal, which at the time of entry into force of this Act was declared to be final by any law. So the Act specifically recognized that there were certain acts that give certain bodies, and in this case the Court of Appeal, jurisdictions, and it recognized that those bodies where the specific acts said that their decisions were final, that the CCJ was to have no jurisdiction. And when Section 4 was passed, or when the Caribbean Court of Justice Act was passed in 2004, that article that I read before, 177.4, which said that the Court of Appeal's decision was final insofar as those matters are concerned, that was in force. And no attempt was made either in the Caribbean Court of Justice Act or in any subsequent act to repeal Article 177.4. I wouldn't get into the process by which that could happen, but nothing was done. What actually happened is that the Caribbean Court of Justice Act specifically recognized that those laws that conferred special jurisdiction on a particular court where it was declared to be final, it would be final. And therefore, in that jurisdiction, to most people, two things happen. One, the Constitution, which is the most supreme law in the country, said that the Court of Appeal should have two things. One, exclusive jurisdiction, i.e. meaning only that court can hear those issues. And two, its decisions shall be final. The Caribbean Court of Justice Act does not enjoy the same status of standing in law as the Constitution. And even though it doesn't, that act in and of itself recognized that where the Constitution or any other law said that there was a special jurisdiction and their decisions were supposed to be final, then those decisions would be and would remain final. That is the legal, historic, and contemporary context in which we found ourselves when the application was made to the Court of Appeal. The honors of the Court of Appeal, every court, first of all, has to decide, first of all, jurisdiction. Normally that is not a challenge because we assume that the court has jurisdiction. But if a case arises where there is any dispute as to whether or not the court has jurisdiction, in other words, authority to determine the dispute, the court has to first decide whether it has jurisdiction. And once it is found that it has jurisdiction, it goes on to hear the issue. If a court finds that it does not have jurisdiction, that is the end of the matter, because it cannot go on to hear an issue if it is not authorized to hear it. What happened here was that the Court of Appeal in Guyana found by a majority that they had jurisdiction and they went on to give a decision. And that decision fell squarely within the provisions of Article 177.4. That decision is now being challenged and there is an application to the Caribbean Court of Justice. The Caribbean Court of Justice, just like the Court of Appeal, first of all, has to decide, one, whether it has jurisdiction at all. And in determining that, it will go to Article 177.4, which I read, which says that it should be, the Court of Appeal has exclusive, and its decision is final, and it will go to the Caribbean Court of Justice Act, as I just read again, Section 4, that says that, where there are special jurisdictions and their decisions are final, and it will examine those provisions, and it will hear extensive arguments from counsel as to whether or not it has jurisdiction. In an effort to expedite the hearing of matters, the court says, look, rather than wait and have the argument about jurisdiction and then we rule and then you come back, put all your arguments in. So if we find jurisdiction, we will go ahead and hear the other issues. If we don't find jurisdiction, they will not go ahead to deliberate upon whether or not the other issues have validity. Because if they have no jurisdiction, they literally cannot proceed beyond that. That becomes the end of the matter. And that, I hope, clarifies where we are. I haven't seen the argument yet, because those provisions are not in, from the persons who made the application to the Caribbean Court of Justice. But I suspect that the thrust of their arguments will be based in Section 26 of the same Caribbean Court of Justice Act, which literally says, and please indulge me, I'll just read this, this is the last thing I'll read.
Sure.
Under Article 123 of the Constitution and this Act, the Caribbean Court of Justice, being the final court of appeal for Guyana, all laws, including the Constitution in force in Guyana or otherwise, having effect as part of the law of Guyana immediately before the commencement of this act shall thereafter be construed and have effect with such modifications, adaptations, qualifications, and exceptions as may be necessary to bring them into conformity with the act. And what that section says basically is that, look, from the time the Caribbean Court of Justice Act came into force, any other laws that were not in conformity with this act had to be construed as recognized in the Caribbean Court of Justice as the final court. And therefore, there must be a right of appeal under Section 4 of the same Act. The difficulty with that is Section 4 of the Act specifically carves out a jurisdiction. Section 4 specifically obliges the Caribbean Court of Justice, to recognize as final decisions made by courts that have exclusive jurisdiction to determine specific issues, and once they make a determination on those issues, it is final. I hope that was very long-winded. Please forgive me, but I hope that gives you a context.
No, it's excellent context.
Yeah. Do you get the sense from the reading that you have done thus far that is a strong case in terms of the jurisdiction not having jurisdiction on the face of it?
Well, let me put it this way, because I think most lawyers will say you may have a lot of confidence in your case, and you may be fortified by the precedent and arguments that you are raising, but you can never be you can never know the outcome of the court. So I say that not to diminish the confidence that I have in what I have said to you. I certainly believe that the language of 177.4 of the Constitution, which is the supreme law of the land, is very clear, and it says that the Court of Appeal has exclusive jurisdiction, and it says the decision is final, and that is where that's where I come down in terms of the interpretation. But as I said before, the reason we are lawyers is, of course, that people find different ways of interpreting the same language that both of us may look at. But I certainly believe that is so, and I would like to commend the references that were made by Francis Alexis, QC, eminent jurist. I don't want to say unparalleled, but eminent constitutional jurist in the Caribbean on this matter.
Yep, and Dr. Alexis is of the view that that special leave should not be granted. As a matter of fact, the reporting coming out of the Guyana Chronicle said he stated very emphatically that the CCJ should clearly refuse the special leave to the litigants in this matter.
Yes, he did, of course, and that is his interpretation, having read Article 177.4. And I think one thing I will say is that I believe that the Caribbean Court of Justice will consider this very deeply. I think it is keenly aware of the implications of the ruling that it may give, not because the issues are political, but the implications for constitutional law, specifically, not just now, but going forward, where you have language that is as clear as it appears to be in Section 177.4 on whether a court will seek to interpret that in a way to confer upon itself jurisdiction where the language of the Constitution appears to have had other intentions. And one of the points I want to raise here is that this is not regular legislation, this is the Constitution. So I believe that the CCJ will spend a lot of time on exclusive and spend a lot of time in final. Because courts tend not to want to trespass, even in their expansive interpretations of various rights, so that they expand human rights, etc., etc. They probably tend not to want to be perceived as encroaching where the clear express intent of the people as expressed in the Constitution had a different view.
Very well. On that very note of of the implications. There is another side to it as well. Justice Adrian Saunders, the president of the CCJ, writing on the subject of the case for the appellate jurisdiction of the CCJ, this is in 2011, said that in certain respects, and I quote, in certain respects, judges are called upon to play the role of social engineers. He goes on to say the resolution of many of the Court of Appeal that reach the final appellate level often hinges on the question of social policy and judicial philosophy. He goes on to say as well that this is invariably the case when the litigation concerns matters of great...
Well, two things. One is, I think by the time any individual, male or female, gets to that they held, the president of the CCJ has actually, I believe, edited a publication, a book on Caribbean constitutions. But what I will say with equal force is, I am sure, and I do recall the president of the Caribbean Court of Justice saying, the fact that he might have expressed a particular view in an article or an academic work ought not to constrain any judge in terms of interpreting the Constitution. And here, despite some people may want some social engineering, but despite that fact, I think here where we are dealing with the Constitution and language that appears to be clear. But you see, if it was an article that was perhaps not as clear or pellucid in its terms, because here it says Court of Appeal shall have exclusive, and it talks about final. So unless, I don't think this lends itself to much ambiguity. So the parameters to allow an interpretation other than what seems to be apparent in the clear meaning of the words, I think are rather limited.
Oh, great. Mr. Hughes, the national recount, coming to that side of things, the tabulation aspect, phase one, lasted about 33 days. It seems that some parties to this national recount want just the tabulated figures as against the qualitative aspect. They favor just the quantitative aspect of it. The national recount, the national gazetted order, spelled out this rigorous scrutiny that the ballots were supposed to undergo in terms of coming to a final credible count. Could you tell the public, in your own view, what is the significance of this gazetted order in relation to instruments, for instance, like the Representation of the People Act and even the Constitution at 177 and so forth?
I'm always reluctant to share my views because it's not necessarily about me. What I will attempt to do in responding to that is say that there was a period in time where the test for determining the credible results or the results of an election came down to a quantitative test. However, that has now matured into not just quantitative, but qualitative as well. And qualitative is a completely separate and distinct set of criteria that have to be applied to the process of election. So I'm just giving you this as an example. You may have 10 voters or 10 eligible persons at an election. And at the end of the election, the count is 6-4. And they ask for a recount because their issue, somebody says that there is a credibility issue or somebody stole a vote out of the 10. And in the process of the recount, we discover that 2 persons who were not alive and capable of voting actually voted in the 10. Those 2 votes, let's say, came from the party that got 4. So that party is now down to 2. So it's 6-2. And the party that lost, whose votes have gone down to 2, says, look, I have a problem with this election because you have found that 2 of the voters were dead. And that's because it's easy to find persons who clearly were dead actually voted. So it means that somebody had to attend the box, collect a ballot, mark it, and put it in, who clearly was not the person. Now the implication of that is this. Even though on a quantitative test it's 6-4, on a qualitative test, here's the problem. If clearly a person who was not alive had the ability to attend that box and vote, how do we know that of the 6 people who voted, 1, they were actually the people who are marked off as having voted and not somebody else? Because if there was somebody else, then clearly it is not the valid vote of that person. And it is because the integrity of the vote is impeached, or it has clearly been shown to be less than credible for the 2. It brings into question whether those who actually attended and were marked off as being present were actually there. And it's not a question of whether the returning officer records the accurate identification card number and marks it off, because he or she would have had to have marked off something for the dead vote to have been counted to get into the box in the first place.
That's great.
So the quality of the election is also important. But I want to go on to say this, if you indulge me.
Go ahead.
In a country that is as divided as ours is along ethnic lines, and that is as small as we are a minuscule population, which means almost that everybody almost knows everybody else. Not literally, but we're not even 1 million people. And where we have a system that says all the power to govern this little kingdom goes into the hands of the victor, and we have a history where the people who are not members of the victorious party always feel that they're excluded. And in heightened ethnic tensions, how are we going forward unless everybody or unless most people at least acknowledge the credibility of the process of election? Because after the election, whichever side wins, if the other side genuinely believes, doesn't necessarily have to be factual, but believes that the process was not credible, it is a recipe for complete disaster. And unfortunately, I am of the view that Guyana's real problem is ethnic and not the counting of the votes. The counting of the votes in democracy is, of course, important. But more important is we at least should have a process which most of the contestants, if not all, accept that the outcome of it is credible.
Excellent, excellent. Mr. Hughes, I want to quickly turn your attention to external forces. We saw a lot of pronouncement, tweets and messages and statements, particularly from the ACBE countries, as it relates to the electoral process, knowing full well that the matter has been taken before the courts. It's currently at the Caribbean Court of Justice, but not awaiting any of those outcomes. But you see the external forces by way of statements. It seems clearly like they're trying to influence the process as if they have a horse in the race. Your view or your perspective on this?
Again, I don't necessarily want to share my view because it's not necessarily about my view, but what I will share is that, one, I don't believe that this is necessarily unprecedented in terms of world affairs. There are several instances where international forces have a preference in the outcome of elections. At the end of the day, it is up to the strength and integrity of the state and its institutions to assert its independence and faithfully interpret the Constitution. And in this case, the institution that we are looking at is the Court of Appeal. And of course, actually Court of Appeal, High Court, all the other courts. So we've had the Chief Justice, Justice George, give decisions before we've got the Court of Appeal here, and we've, of course, before that, we've had the Caribbean Court of Justice. My primary concern is that at all levels of the judiciary, however the decision goes, the person or persons making those decisions are insulated as far as possible from influence from any external factors, however they may manifest themselves. And at the end of the day, for us as Guyanese, we have to ensure that we have institutions that are credible, and we have to insulate them, I dare say. I know both of you are politicians. We have to insulate them from the politicians, and equally so, we have to insulate them from forces that may be beyond our geographic boundaries.
Excellent.
Yep. Mr. Hughes, I want to come back to something you said earlier on. You were using the case of the valid votes, that people who might have voted and so forth.
I was using the example. It was an example.
Yes. There is a Zimbabwean case where the Chief Justice in the case said, and I want to get your impression of it. He said that they made clear that once there are pockets of votes that point to a corrupt and fraudulent scheme, they contaminate the entire process and are indicative of a corrupt scheme that was afoot on election day, in which no one knows how much or to what extent the wicked enterprise impacted the process, including the votes deemed illegal. And this is close to what you were saying, sir.
Yes, but I think most lawyers will say to you, you can give me one case, but of course they would like to have the benefit of both reading the full judgment, so that before they endorse what may be a part of it, but certainly what the principles that seem to be emanating from what you've said seem
was Attorney at Law Mr. Nigel Hughes walking us through several aspects of the Irfanali, Barjagdio and others versus Eslin David case, which comes up for appeal before the CCJ tomorrow. We believe strongly that the court does not have jurisdiction, as is clearly espoused by the Constitution. Mr. Nigel Hughes feels the same way. And also, we've had senior counsel, what's the gentleman's name, Chris, just yesterday in the papers, talking on the same matter, that he also is of the opinion that the CCJ does not have jurisdiction to hear of this matter before the CCJ. And so we are going to be paying careful attention to that and how that rolls out tomorrow. But in other news coming out of the Ghana Elections Commission, the lawyer for the chairman of GCOM has stated that they no longer wish to pursue the matter or be a party to the Court of Appeal matter, which comes up for hearing on Wednesday, the 1st day of July, before the Caribbean Court of Justice. And I just want to read part of that correspondence to the CCJ. It is dated the 28th day of June, which is yesterday, 2020, and it's addressed to the Registrar and Marshal of the Caribbean Court of Justice. It says, the Registrar, with reference to the Mohammed Irfan Ali and others versus Eslin David case, I refer to the matter at caption. Please bring to the attention of the honorable judges that on further consideration, we do not wish to actively participate in the appeal. In the circumstances, we do not wish to make any submission. This is signed by Ms. Kim Kai John for the third named respondent, which is the chairman of the Ghana Elections Commission. Again, I'll read it. It's a very short missive here. Please bring to the attention of the honorable judges that on further consideration, we do not wish to actively participate in the appeal. In the circumstances, we do not wish to make any submissions. Yeah. Yep. And so that is the chairman of the Ghana Elections Commission pulling out of the that appeal hearing tomorrow, on Wednesday rather, 1st day of July, before the Caribbean Court of Justice.
Yeah. So with that withdrawal there, the Ghana Elections Commission, by way of the chairman of the Elections Commission, has withdrawn from the arguments and withdrawn from making any submission, and essentially to have no further part in that discourse, because of course, again, that coming from the Ghana Elections Commission by way of Attorney at Law Ms. Kite, representing Justice Claudette Singh.
Yep, and I noted, Chris, that one commentator, Mr. Ronald Austin Jr. on social media, he would have said of this case, Chris, that the withdrawal of the chairperson of GCOM, Justice Claudia Singh, from the CCJ case should not go unnoticed. He goes on to state that in the context of things, it is volcanic and cataclysmic. Coming on the heels of the most authoritative legal minds on constitutional law in the Caribbean, Dr. Francis Alexis, who was the individual we are trying to remember just now, suggesting that the appeal is doomed. It makes it even more newsworthy. Again, it was Dr. Francis Alexis, which took the headline of yesterday's Guyana Chronicle, stating the exact same thing, that this case by the PPP before the CCJ is doomed. And he says within that context, the withdrawal of the chairman of the Guyana Elections Commission, Justice Claudia Singh, from this process of the appeal is very, very noteworthy. In his words, even more newsworthy rather there. Yep.
Right. All right, so that will take us out of program time for today, but just a quick reminder, again, all and sundry in terms of where we are.
Yeah.
The Guyana Elections Commission, having done the national recount by way of the gazetted order, which spelled out specifically the way, manner in which the recount would have been done. It was not just a numerical count, but both quantitative as well. That having been done, the CEO of the Elections Commission, Mr. Keith Lowenfield, submitted his report in keeping with Section 96 of the Representation of the People's Act. That representation speaks to, and I quote, that the CEO, Mr. Keith Lowenfield, will submit the total amount, calculate the total amount of valid votes. Having done so, Section 177.2 refers to the chairman of the Elections Commission acting only in accordance with the advice given to her by the CEO of the Elections Commission, shall deem a person to be president-elect. The CEO's report is out and in the public's domain. It speaks to the APNU-AFC winning the March 2nd general and regional elections by some 170,000 plus votes, and the People's Progressive Party Civic some 166,000 plus votes. This means that the APNU-AFC is the clear winner of the March 2nd general and regional elections based on the total amount of valid votes, in keeping with Section 96 of the Representation of the People's Act. A private citizen, Ms. Eslyn David, moved to the Court of Appeal to get a confirmation on the meaning of the term valid votes. 2 out of 3 justices rule in favor of Ms. Eslyn David that the terms mean exactly what it says. The total amount of valid votes are the ones that should be calculated. In keeping with the Section 96 of the Representation of the People's Act, the CEO did just that and submitted his report. Now that the People's Progressive Party Civic has moved to the Caribbean Court of Justice to have an appeal in the matter, Guyana's Constitution, Article 177.4, is pollusive. It speaks to any matter that appears before it at the Court of Appeal. The Court of Appeal shall have the final say, and there's no grounds for any appeal. For the Caribbean Court of Justice to do anything other than throwing the matter out, it will be to infringe on Guyana's Constitution and our sovereignty. Several Caribbean territories are watching and waiting to see what is going to be the outcome from the Caribbean Court of Justice.
Yep.
In other words, the Caribbean Court of Justice's integrity, the President of the Caribbean Court of Justice integrity, and whether or not the Caribbean Court of Justice will be viewed in the Caribbean as anything of substance will be determined by those justices on Wednesday.
Yep.
Again, the Caribbean Court of Justice has no jurisdiction in the matter.
Yep.
And the Constitution of Guyana, which is supreme, speaks to and is pollusive as it relates to this matter.
Yeah, and Chris, talking about watching and waiting, before we go, tomorrow is a very, very big day at the International Court of Justice, because our border controversy case with Venezuela comes up for hearing tomorrow. As you may know by now, Venezuela has refused to participate in the case the very same way the Chief Justice, the chairman of GCOM is now refusing to participate in the case, in the appeals case before the CCJ. But back when he was president, Mr. Bar Jagdio did offer some comments on the border controversy with Venezuela. Past President Bar Jagdio, when he was president, did offer some comments on the border case and the border controversy with Venezuela. And here is what he had said at that time.
Jagdio in 2015 had said that he believed that there are other courses Guyana can take with regards to the Guyana-Venezuela border controversy to resolve the matter. But one view expressed by Mr. Jagdeo had raised some eyebrows. This was what he had to say in October 2015.
You could probably, on the maritime area, give Venezuela a channel out to the sea. So you make a slight concession in the maritime area, but make sure that you do not concede any territory that is land-based.
Days after that statement by Mr. Jagdeo, Venezuela further denounced ExxonMobil drilling in the Essequibo River. But Mr. Jagdeo does not see any relationship between his statement and Venezuela's denunciation. In fact, he said Venezuela issuing a decree to Guyana is nothing new. But when pressed further by Nightly News about if his statement might have pushed Venezuela to issue that decree, Mr. Jagdeo responded.
I can't say what Venezuela will say. Venezuela, days after they came in, when the Minister of Foreign Affairs called the President of Venezuela monkey on our backs, but he now encouraging them to cancel the rice deal. How do you call the President of Suriname monkey on our backs? The rice deal got cancelled quickly. Was there a causal relationship?
The opposition leader said he does not play politics with border issues, but he fully supports the government's position on the issue. But Mr. Jagdeo also said this.
If Apnu wants to make the border issue contentious, we can go down that route. I've chosen not to make it contentious because I can explore how they approach various border issues, from the New River Triangle to the Quarantine River, the maritime area offshore of Suriname, and the Venezuela issue.
Subtítulos y traducción. Mi mapa de Venezuela incluye nuestro Essequibo.
Welcome back. And so there you have it, Mr. Jagdeo's solution to the problem was to cede part of our territory to the Venezuelans.
Yeah. Give Venezuela a concession so they have a channel to go out.
Yep.
Give Venezuela part of Guyana. Give it over to them.
Give them part of our sovereign territory.
Says Barrett Jagdeo. Of course, tomorrow this matter comes up at the ICJ, the International Court of Justice. Of course, you know, Guyana has taken a firm stance as it relates to this matter. And of course, it has garnered much support as it relates to this issue. So tomorrow we will hear, it's not likely going to be the outcome.
Yeah.
We're going to hear from
some of the arguments being put forward.
Correct. Yep. And of course, we will bring you the legal luminaries who could give us some insight into the case that is going to be heard tomorrow at the ICJ, so you will have a greater appreciation of where we are. Yeah. All right, so on that note, we will take our leave. We invite you right back here at 5 o'clock this afternoon. We will bring you an interview which was done in Trinidad and Tobago by Mr. Aubrey C. Norton on one of their radio programs. They're starting to set the record straight in terms of what is happening in Guyana. We will bring you that interview, that exclusive interview at 5 o'clock this afternoon right here on our program. And of course, we will have more information to bring to you. Last night when we went out, we did break that story to you, emanating from Attorney at Law Glenn Hanneman's chambers, in which he was seeking to bring a private criminal charges against the CEO of the Guyana Elections Commission, Mr. Keith Lowenfield. We are still watching and waiting. Our correspondents are down at the court there, but until right up to when we came on air, they indicated that no such filing has been made. But of course, they're still outside of the court. And once anything is filed there by way of Attorney at Law Mr. Glenn Hanneman bringing that private criminal charges against the CEO of the Guyana Elections Commission, Mr. Keith Lowenfield, we will bring you that update immediately. But thus far, down at the courts, nothing yet has been filed. And of course, we did bring that breaking story to you last night, emanating from the chambers of Attorney at Law Mr. Glenn Hanneman. All right. Until this afternoon, on behalf of my colleague, Mr. Sherrod Duncan, our technical team, we look forward to seeing you right back here at 5 p.m. this afternoon. Until then, goodbye for now.
And stay safe.